With the USTA set to announce in only 2-3 weeks from now what's going to happen with the U.S. Open this year, I've got a lot of things in today's stack that tells us we should be pretty optimistic if we're hoping to see life go back to something like normal and see some U.S. Open tennis on TV. So let me just briefly highlight for you a couple of things that I have here in today's stack of tennis news from around the world. Number one, Italian Tennis Federation President Angelo Benacchi is confident that the Rome Masters clay court tennis tournament will happen in September. Now, that's real tennis. As far as exhibition tennis, and we've seen some of it on a pretty small scale, it's about to ramp up with star power, especially in one thing that I'll tell you in just a moment that is pretty exciting, but just a rumor, I must preface that. Novak Djokovic has started his Adria Tour, which goes across different Balkan countries, including Serbia, and that'll be starting only about a week or two, and that's going to go into early July, and then picking up in early July. We would have had Wimbledon, right? Well, we don't get Wimbledon this year. We know that. We accept that. But in early July, there will be a grass court tournament in Berlin. Already, we know for sure Jannik Sinner, Nick Kyrgios, Dominic Thiem, and Sasha Zverev, all of them are going to be featured, and there's rumors of possibly, we know there's going to be a couple more players in that Berlin grass court exhibition that's going to be in early July. One of them is rumored to be Roger Federer. So we may see Roger Federer playing on grass in less than a couple months from now. Now, you may have seen in the last week or two, a lot of tennis players, even some big names like Rafa Nadal, pretty skeptical about whether or not we will actually have real tennis tournaments this year other than some kind of exhibition stuff. But we should note, Rafa Nadal, take a look for yourself, is back on court, training, getting ready to play some tennis. But you might be saying to yourself, Matt, what about the governments and the state government, federal government in the USA? What about laws and traveling and coronavirus related stuff like that? If the players want to play at the U.S. Open, if the USTA wants to do it, that might not be enough. Well, things look even better on that front, as Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York State has said, quote, New York State is ready and willing to partner with major sports teams, or, in tennis's case, not a team, but, tennis is the odd one out in that case. I think he means that as well. We're ready to, let's just say, Andrew Cuomo is ready and willing, quote, to partner with major sports that are interested in playing games safely without fans. Now, we've all heard that the U.S. Open might not be able to afford to run the U.S. Open without fans, without that income, without that money coming in from selling tickets to fans. If they have to use an empty stadium, they might have to scrap the whole thing because there just won't be enough money to put on the big show. But this guy, who sounds pretty reliable as a source regarding putting on the U.S. Open financially, USTA's Chief Revenue Officer Lou Scher believes that a U.S. Open without fans still can be considered financially viable. Yes, it all started in Indian Wells. Coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic starts. The first major sporting event was a tennis event. Indian Wells tournament in California to be canceled completely. After that, everything else in the world gets shut down, canceled. We all know what happened. And now, and a lot of people are recognizing in the tennis world the opportunity that there is for tennis to be seen globally as a sport in front of more people, possibly the most watched tennis tournament in all of history, one of the most watched sporting events in all of history maybe. This is a possibility. More and more people are talking about it because if you make the U.S. Open in New York City the first major sporting event to come back to pave the way for everyone else, it'll be quite a spectacle and can only help grow the sport tennis. That will be the main focus of what we dive into in today's edition of Coffee Break Tennis. Did I literally just do a whole show intro with these things in? What's wrong with me? Today on Coffee Break Tennis, Rafa Nadal fans have been freaking out, thinking that he might retire. Only problem is they got the wrong Nadal. We'll talk about that. Of course, we're going to take a nice look at the exhibitions going on around the world and how that will all hopefully lead to a U.S. Open and then a French Open, two more majors in this year, 2020, that many of us had already given up on, including, we've got an article in here today that we'll talk about from ubitennis.com. Many tennis players themselves are becoming an obstacle for the U.S. Open, as Marin Cilic was the first one to start it all off, saying that if we do a U.S. Open without fans, it doesn't really count. It'll feel like a practice match, he said. Many other players have voiced their opinions on this, including Roger Federer. And one player was quite offended by what Roger Federer had to say. We'll get into that. Also, Marion Bartoli, former Wimbledon champion, has been the latest voice to speak out about Dominic Thiem. Dominic Thiem has been getting beat up, but he refuses to back down from his original statement that he doesn't want to be forced to donate money to a player relief fund for lower-ranked players. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the highest paid, Forbes' highest paid athletes of the year list has come out. And finally, for the first time in history, deservedly so, a tennis player is number one, beating even the dreaded soccer players, soccer stars. Who is it? Of course, it's going to be the player that this show favors the most. We'll get into all that, nothing more, maybe something more, on today's edition of Coffee Break Tennis. It's a little cold now, but it's still good. Let's start off with this Nadal retirement thing. To me, like, are these the most casual tennis fans in the world? Or you know what? You know what it is? When I first got into tennis, I wasn't really a big sports fan, so I didn't watch the other sports that much. And I wouldn't have known much about, like, what Triple Crown. For all I would have known, Triple Crown means, winning 3 majors in a tennis calendar. Let's put this Bleacher Report headline on the screen. Maybe if you're new to tennis or you're new to the world of sports and you're a big tennis fan now, maybe you think Kentucky Derby is, some kind of tennis tournament that you just hadn't heard of before. Maybe you think it's one of those cool exhibitions they're doing because of coronavirus. So take a look at this. Kentucky Derby points leader Nadal retires after leg injury. Now, we all know that Nadal's had a lot of issues with his knees and his lower body in general. So it doesn't sound impossible to me for somebody who doesn't know much about sports outside of tennis to see this headline and think they're talking about Rafa Nadal. But no, of course, the Kentucky Derby is horse racing, and they are talking about a horse named Nadal, probably named after Rafa Nadal for his fighting spirit and all the other nice features about Rafa. My biggest problem with this is can we just scroll up and look at the picture of a horse? I'll give you one more benefit of the doubt on that one. I'll say maybe, because this happens occasionally when you're reading, if you read a lot of news, occasionally they'll mix up the photo. They'll put the wrong photo on top of the story. Maybe you thought that. But if you're out there freaking out, worried about it, and I seriously doubt that because we know that the most educated tennis fans in the world come here to Coffee Break Tennis to get their tennis news, and surely you are not one of those people. But maybe somebody's new to the show. Maybe you thought Nadal was going to retire. It's not Rafa. It's a horse. Still a sad story. From the Washington Post, written by Matt Bonesteel, quote from the co-owner of the horse named Nadal, George Bolton. Nadal, the horse, he retires undefeated. He retires, thank God, on a soon-to-be recovery. He gave us 4 great races. The Nadal retires headlines naturally caused some consternation among tennis fans who were worried that Rafa Nadal, the 19-time Grand Slam singles champ, was hanging up his racket at the age of 33. Fact check, correction, Rafa is aged 34. Not 33. Besides, 34 is the new 33, I had been told. All right, so let's do a lot of focus on the U.S. Open, like I said, in the show intro today, because that's what matters most to me right now. I'm excited. There's going to be a Novak Djokovic exhibition tour in the Balkan states. I'm excited about that. I'm really excited if Federer is going to play, but even if he doesn't, Dominic Thiem, Nick Kyrgios, guys like that, Zverev, Sinner, guys like that playing on grass, are definitely something to be excited about for the month of July. But let's talk about real tennis, and the only real tennis that's going to start things off is going to be the U.S. Open. And if they back down and don't do it, it'll probably be the French Open. Don't let that happen. Make it the U.S. Open. The biggest problem, this is from ubitennis.net. I knew it was .net. Adam Adicott wrote it, May 26th. It is dated. ubitennis.net, the biggest problem of holding the U.S. Open behind closed doors could be not COVID-19, the players. The United States Tennis Association appears determined. Like I said, a lot of good news today if you want the U.S. Open to happen. If you don't want it to happen, bad news for you. The USTA appears determined to stage this year's U.S. Open despite the threat of COVID-19. One option is slowly emerging as a strong possibility, but there is already opposition from some of the sport's top men. Who's working on it?
We have top men working on it right now. Who? Top men.
Top men. Some of the sport's top names, a little Indiana Jones reference there for you. Earlier, we quoted the USTA's chief revenue officer, Lou Scher. Well, we didn't. We said he believes it could still be financially viable to have a U.S. Open without fans. So let's look at exactly what he said. He said, 2 months ago, it just didn't feel like he could stage the celebration or the spectacle that is the U.S. Open in no fan scenario and have it be what we think of as the U.S. Open. And that's true. That's a fair point. That's basically, if you didn't hear what Roger Federer had said, we'll get into that a little bit, but Roger Federer basically said for him, and I'm thinking mainly of the top players.
Top men.
For the guys that can win, you value the majors so much. You play on the big center court, the stadium court with all the fans there screaming, making all the noise. It makes it feel very important. And if it's going to be an empty stadium, that's definitely going to have some kind of mental impact on these top players who regularly feel like they have a chance to win the big major tournaments. So I get that. But let's continue with what Mr. Lou Scher said, the USTA's chief revenue officer. As we've gone forward, I've come around to recognizing what an achievement it would be to play and how much our fans are missing the game and would be excited to see the competition. And that you need to think about it differently. It's a different event. It would be broadcast differently. It would be consumed differently. It's not just playing the U.S. Open as you know it with empty seats. And then he goes to point out that the media rights deals will enable sponsors of the U.S. Open to be seen worldwide. As I said in the beginning of the show, the intro, that this would be a huge audience, right? This would be the first major sporting event back. People who don't even care about tennis would probably tune in just to see what's going on. However, and this is where the story gets interesting. However, there is one problem that the USTA probably didn't want to encounter: a lack of enthusiasm from some of the sports stars. If you think Marin Cilic is a star, let me just say he is not on the Forbes list of highest earning athletes. It all started with 2014 champion Marin Cilic told Reuters that such a move could devalue this year's U.S. Open. Quote, Marin Cilic said, "I just feel that it's going to more or less feel like practice matches. It's always going to be in the years to come. Oh, you know the guy that won a U.S. Open in 2020 without fans? I don't think it's going to have the weight of actually like winning a major, and it wouldn't be the best scenario." I have one counter to that, Marin Cilic. If a member of the Big Three won it, we'd all still consider it the same. If somebody else broke through, we would say something like, well, maybe because there was no fans there, it was just, a disadvantage to the top players who are used to that, and it was better for someone who's lower ranked and used to playing in front of less fans or no fans. Roger Federer admits that he will find it difficult to play without a crowd cheering him on. For us, of course, it is possible to play without any fans, but on the other hand, I really hope that the circuit can return as it normally is. May we wait for the appropriate time. You got to flick your hair when you're Roger Federer. May we wait for the appropriate time to return to normal mode again, at least a third of the stadium or half full. But for me, completely empty when playing in big tournaments, very difficult, says Roger Federer. And of course, that had a lot of weight behind it. But things are changing so fast with coronavirus and the COVID-19 epidemic. Things are changing so fast and looking so much better and more optimistic as we go further. Obviously, most of the United States is pretty much open now, slowly opening, carefully opening. We're social distancing. We're wearing masks. But I think there is a possibility to even maybe sell some seats in the U.S. Open. Maybe charge more money. Maybe only wealthier people will be able to go. But as long as everyone else can watch on TV, and as Roger Federer said, I feel like a lot of people took his comment the wrong way. Having the stadium about a third full, you might be able to do that with social distancing. You could charge more. You could charge the same. It doesn't really matter. They also add in here Petra Kvitova, another voice to oppose playing a tournament with no fans. But there is one player quoted in this article who's all for it. Dirty Dan. Dan Evans said, "Me, personally, I would love it to go ahead. I think it would send out a real statement that we can get back going. It could be an amazing spectacle that tennis goes ahead with no one in the stadium and everybody watching on the telly." Yes, that is a real quote he said on the telly. The U.S. Open is set to take place between August 30th, September 13th. The USTA will make a final decision regarding the event next month. So stand by, tennis fans. We will know. All will be revealed in due time. Due course. Now, before we look at the one player who's very angry with what Roger Federer said, and he's got a fair point, although I feel like, again, when Federer says, we got to just have some fans, make the stadiums a third full, sounds more reasonable when you put it in that context. But let's take a look at what Greg Rusedski said. A little bit of what I was talking about, but what an opportunity this is to have this huge audience. And let's put it with a pundit that we all know and adore. Greg Rusedski, He explains why tennis needs U.S. Open to be staged in 2020. The show must go on, according to Greg Ruzetsky. What does the bloke have to say? We need to find a way to get the U.S. Open on this year, with or without spectators. So long as we can do it, this is from tennisworldusa.org, quoting from an interview from sport24.com. So long as we can do it in a way that is safe for all the players and everyone involved, and I think we can, we have to try, we have to do it. Thinking about the millions of fans around the world who will be watching if we get tennis back. This is a chance to bring tennis to an even bigger audience. See what I mean? I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one who thinks this. Bigger audience than usual, and even if we don't have fans in the stadiums, we'll have them in their millions and millions around the world watching on TV. He also points out how it would be such a unique experience. It would really be kind of a spectacle. Now, maybe we could argue that watching tennis, and I don't want to say this is for sure. Maybe I imagined this, but I could have sworn I read last week somewhere that they were talking about putting crowd noise, like the NFL does sometimes, putting crowd noise through the speakers in the stadium to make it sound like after a good point that people are cheering and there's no one there. I don't know if that's a great idea. It sounds kind of like a horrible idea, actually. It'd be pretty weird. So maybe you can make an argument that, doing this without fans, it's just going to look terrible. Who wants to watch a sporting event that looks like no one cares because the seats are all empty? But I think people understand. I think most people, like me, happy to see it. We understand COVID-19 and all the stuff that's been going on. We get it. Just give us the tennis. It would be a unique experience, continues Greg Ruzetsky. Even if there were no fans, it would be something we would remember throughout time, that we played a major during the time of the coronavirus pandemic. It would be historic. It would be something that we would all remember. I think he has a good point. The site of the U.S. Open is massive. With no spectators there, social distancing would not be a problem. Corporate suites not be used. There's enough space for everyone involved in the event. There could also be enough space to designate separate areas for each and every player involved in the event. We still have June, July, and August before the U.S. Open is due to be played by then. A lot of businesses have opened up by then, and so long as the players feel safe, we can do it the right way. We need to find a way to get tennis back. I could not agree more, Mr. Ruzetsky. We've disagreed in the past, Greg Ruzetsky, but this time, we are united. Speaking of that show is terrible. It's terrible. I don't know. I haven't taken too fair of a look, but I saw a little bit the other day with Bethany Maddox-Sanson. It was terrible. Andrew Harris, not happy. Remember Andrew Harris? Remember that guy? Andrew Harris, in other news, not happy with Roger Federer's comments about playing in empty stadiums. Australian tennis player Andrew Lloyd Harris says that, is that right? Didn't he have like a Andrew Lloyd? Wasn't that his name? I thought. I misremember. Is that somebody else? Is that somebody from history or something? Andrew Harris says that the global tennis circuit should resume when it is safe to do so, in response on social media to Roger Federer's comments. And I got to warn you, Fed fans out there, hold back your rage and anger when you hear the dismissive way that he referred to Roger Federer. During a recent video chat with former number one Gustavo Kuerten, Federer had said, "I can't imagine competing in an empty stadium. I hope it never happens. As much as when we train there are no people, competing is very different." I think it's a fair point, especially for a top tennis player who's so used to this. But Harris posted a tweet saying that the tour should resume whenever it is safe to do so and that it was selfish of Roger Federer to comment on those lines. Then he deleted this tweet and made similar comments in response to a query from another Twitter user. Ranked 204 in the world, Harris said, "How about the tour returns when it's appropriately safe to do so and those players struggling can actually earn some income? Standard selfishness from Roger Federer." Then he deleted the tweet. I don't know what the standard selfishness thing is. Apparently, he's got some kind of history here with Roger Federer, or he feels that Federer is inherently a selfish guy. I don't know. He went on to respond to another Twitter user who tweeted something at him, probably an enraged Federer fan. He said, "The tour should resume as soon as it is appropriately safe to do so, as I mentioned in my original tweet. If that means resuming without fans in the meantime, then that is what should happen, not because Roger Federer doesn't want to play in front of no fans." Now, I get his point. These guys are struggling. If you're ranked 200-something in the world, you need the paycheck. And if there's no fans, well, you know what? When you're ranked 204 in the world, you're kind of used to that. Not a big deal. What is a big deal? Not having money. And as we'll learn from Forbes, Forbes.com later in today's show, Roger Federer is now the highest paid athlete in the world of any sport. Amazing. Comment below what you think of that. I am very curious. Mr. Goat, before he left, he reminded me to ask people to comment below on this. Does this even exist? Are you a Federer fan who agrees with Andrew Harris? You're very angry. You're just outraged about the selfishness of Roger Federer. Or do you see it more like me? One, it's a little bit out of context because Federer says, like, we should try to get a third of the stadium full before we go on with an empty stadium. And I'm sure someone like Federer thinks it could be damaging to the sport. Hey, let's put this on. It'll have the most spectators on TV ever, as Dirty Dan Evans pointed out on the telly. But it'll look like tennis sucks because no one's there watching and no one cares. So maybe some people feel like that. Maybe Federer feels like it could be damaging. Let's at least get a third full. And with social distancing, I'm pretty sure the biggest dedicated tennis stadium in the world, right, at the U.S. Open, Arthur Ashe Stadium, I'm pretty sure, like, charge whatever you want. One fan per row, or three, or five, right? Can we get 6 feet in between them? I think we can. I think it's very possible. I think we can meet Roger Federer's idea of getting the stadium about a third full. And guys like Harris, who will lose in the first round anyways, they'll be able to get that check. All right. Cuomo says New York professional sports teams can begin training. This is from Forbes.com. We already talked about this a little bit. This follows up with a little bit more from what Cuomo says. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said, quote, "I believe that sports can come back without having people in the stadium, without having people in the arena. Do it. We want you up. We want people to be watching sports. To the extent that people are still staying at home, it gives people something to do. It's a return to normalcy, so we are working and encouraging all sports teams to start their training camps as soon as possible." When he talks about spring training, he's talking about baseball in particular, but he's saying all sports. Now, the key there is, what if Federer says, I'm not going to the U.S. Open this year because I don't want to play for an empty stadium, and the U.S. Open says, we want to have some fans with social distancing, and Governor Cuomo says, I said without fans. That could be a thing, but again, as Greg Gruzetsky pointed out, the U.S. Open Stadium, it's very big. It's a big place. I think we could have fans and social distancing, and as we saw from the USTA financial guy, they definitely are thinking about doing it without fans. It looks like it could still be financially viable, and they got to do it. We all know that the USTA is hurting if they don't take in any money from this year's U.S. Open if they were to cancel it. Now, this just hit the news wire, right before I started doing today's show. I took one last check to see if there was any breaking news out in the world, one last search through the internet to see if anything popped up in the time from when I started getting ready for the show to hitting the camera. And this came up. So let's go to sport24.com. Italian Open to be played in Rome in September, says the Italian Tennis Federation president, I should say. I already quoted this in the beginning of the show, but let's take a little deeper look. Let's start with the last paragraph. That's not how you're supposed to do it in journalism, right? I went to a school for journalism communications, and they tell you to lead with your best stuff. Well, to me, this article, and it happens all the time in media, the bottom is the most interesting thing. The tournament, meaning Rome, the Masters Rome clay tournament in Italy, the tournament would, however, overlap with the French Open at Roland Garros, which begins on the 20th of September with qualifying the week before. So what they said in this article is, here's the quote from the Italian Tennis Federation president. "I think that barring major upheavals, we are going to reorganize the International Biennale d'Italia in September between the middle and the end of the month." Well, the only problem is that's what the French Open is supposed to do. But the French Open has been saying they want to make sure they don't step on the toes of the U.S. Open. So I don't think that would be a thing that would happen because that would be insane, right? First of all, no top players would go to Rome. They would all be at the French Open. Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think it's important to look at all the news stories we have seen lately talking about how the French Open is prepared to work on the decisions they make with the U.S. Open, and pretty much everyone's waiting to see. Again, we're only like 3 weeks away from an announcement from the USTA about what's going to actually happen. So fingers crossed out there. Hopefully that was a lot of good news. Let's go to some of the darker side of tennis. Marion Bartoli on Dominic Thiem. This is from tennisworldusa.org. "I think he's making his image quite damaged." Marion Bartoli says, "To me, he," meaning Dominic Thiem, "phrased it quite badly. I think when you have the whole world trying to help each other, it's a little bit too rude from him to say straight away, I'm not going to help those players." But that's not really what Dominic Thiem was saying. Dominic Thiem doesn't, like, and Novak Djokovic should understand. You know, Novak Djokovic feels like, hey, if you want a vaccine, that's great, but I don't think we should be forced to take vaccines. Some people might disagree or agree with Novak Djokovic on that. Dominic Thiem is saying the same thing. Hey, before you force me to hand out $5,000 to a player fund, first off, Dominic Thiem buried in this article, it says that he has privately been helping tennis players, maybe his Austrian tennis player buddy. But who knows? It doesn't matter. If he's helping anyone, that's a great thing. That's a great act of charity from Dominic Thiem. I mean, this is definitely a story that has escalated. I've seen it around enough. I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal. I think it will fade away eventually. But it's been a PR, public relations hit for Dominic Thiem. But I love this sentence here. Since then, 2020 Australian Open runner-up, Dominic Thiem has said how close he was to being 2020 Australian Open champ. How close? Dominic Thiem has said that he stands by his comments and noted that there are players he has been financially supporting for years, but he doesn't want to publicly reveal their names. Now, maybe if you're very skeptical, you'll say, sure, Dominic Thiem, you don't want to reveal their names because they don't exist. But I wouldn't be surprised at all. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were some Austrian players that Dominic Thiem was helping. Pretty much everyone in tennis agrees over the years, if you've been following the sport, you hear it often enough. Most of the players think Dominic Thiem is one of the best guys, one of the nicest guys on tour. And it wouldn't shock me at all to see that Dominic Thiem really has been financially supporting some players behind the scenes and not wanting to draw attention to himself. I think that's a pretty virtuous quality for Dominic Thiem, if I may say so. As part of Djokovic's proposal, each top 5 player would donate $30,000, but the Austrian wasn't willing to do so because he thinks some lower-ranked players aren't fighting enough to succeed in tennis, and he'd rather help more specific causes. Let's dump this one. That, to me, dump a volley in the net. This is what a bad volley looks like. Dump in. Don't break the wrist. Just push it. To me, Dominic Thiem wants to focus on more specific causes, and he's got a good point. You dilute the funds. If you take all this money from top players and then you just equally distribute it to all these lower-ranked players, as Dominic Thiem said, some of those guys aren't real professionals. Some of those guys don't take the sport super serious, and you're kind of diluting the funds. The guys that really need it, they're going to get less. The guys who don't need it, they're going to get more. I support Dominic Thiem's position. Comment below if you disagree. Speaking of Dominic Thiem, Sasha Zverev, Nick Kyrgios, all playing. ESPN.com has the story. Exhibition in Berlin. Dominic Thiem, Alexander Sasha Zverev, Nick Kyrgios play an exhibition tennis match in Berlin in July amid the coronavirus pandemic. The exhibition event will run from July 13th to July 15th on grass and another on a hard court in the hangar in the city's closed Tempelhof Airport, which has quite a history if you look into that, the Tempelhof Airport, from July 17th to 19th. Each tournament will feature 6 men, 6 women, and there will be 200,000 euros in total prize money available. A little Austrian lingo for you there. Dominic Thiem, Zverev, Kyrgios will be joined by Yannick Sinner for the Italian super sensation that we all think maybe could have a real future in the sport. And 2 more players will be announced later. Blah, blah, blah. Who are the 2 mystery players? Well, the Express had a story saying it is rumored one of them is Roger Federer. That was like a lob volley. Only cool if somebody like Fabrice Santoro hits it. All right, last thing, and then we will get out of here. Oh, no. I have something so good. Real quick, flash this on the screen. Top players making the money. Despite Roger Federer making less than a half in the prize money of what Nadal and Djokovic made in the last year. In endorsements, Roger Federer he doubles them. Put them together, they don't even get there, right? Roger Federer accumulated earnings of $106.3 million in the last year, whereas Novak Djokovic is at 23rd position with $44.6 million. Rafa Nadal is number 27 on the list of the top 100 athletes, earning $40 million in the last 12 months. And then Japanese tennis star, and this is a big deal because with the Olympics coming, a lot of sponsors of the Olympics in Tokyo, they decided to make Kei Nishikori the face of Japanese tennis. So one of the faces of Japanese Olympic Games in general. So he picked up a lot of stuff in the last year. That's why he's so high up on the list. And then we've got Naomi Osaka, who actually moved past Serena Williams, number 29 on the list. And again, this is a list of men and women. These are only women on it. So big shout out to tennis and the power of tennis. They happen to both be tennis players. But number 29 for Osaka, number 33 out of the top 100 paid athletes in the world, and that's Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams. So big accomplishment there. That's pretty awesome stuff from the world of tennis. Last thing, I found this from TheGuardian.com. It's about Dinara Safina, the younger sister of Marat Safin. In Russia, you got Safin and Safina. That's how the names work there. And I always wondered what happened to her because, you know, she was rising up the rankings. It looked like she could compete with anyone, even Serena. It looked like maybe she could, win some majors. And then she was like the biggest choker of all time. And as I learned to play tennis and competed in like league tournaments and things like that around Georgia, the more I did it, the more I started, if I got far, I would find myself choking and really dealing with just mental stuff, wanting to win so bad that I kind of froze up and couldn't play. So I always wondered about Safina when I would see her playing back then and, feeling like she's choking. I felt like I was a choker, and I was just so curious, and I really felt for her. And now, in this interview here that we have at theguardian.com, Safina has really been open about what happened in those years, and I think it's very interesting, especially if you're a tennis player yourself. Maybe you're younger, you're playing juniors or something like that, and you really care about playing tennis. I think this is a valuable lesson, and let's talk a little bit about this. And then I got one thing from Sev Luthi, coach of Roger Federer, that basically highlights how his mental approach and that of the big three and other successful tennis players is so different than what Dinara Safina went through. So let's start with Dinara Safina. It's been 9 years since Safina, now 33 and retired. Again, Rafa Nadal, 34. Safina's been retired for so long that some of you watching probably don't even know who she is, right? You probably started watching tennis if you're new to the sport long after she retired. It's been 9 years, all right, so about 10 years, since Dinara Safina competed, and she is locked down in Moscow now during COVID-19. It takes just one question about whether she returned to the sport, if not for the stress fractures in her back, to understand that for everything she did, she never actually managed to reach either of those simple goals that she set years ago. And that's a previous paragraph that I had deleted from this story because I always trim these stories down so I'm not talking and reading a piece of paper forever on the show, right? I just want to get to the most important stuff. Basically, she said when she was younger, her goals in tennis were just to have fun and not get injured. So, Dinara said, if I would be able to start from the beginning of my career, maybe, but I don't feel like coming back to the tour. It's something that I guess is very deep. I think I got disappointed in some ways by tennis because I dreamed that once you become really famous, you become number one in the world, you would have a different life. But once you have this, once you're number one, everything, and you realize that it's not what you've been dreaming of, all of your dreams begin to fall apart. And the article goes on, and this is Tumani. I never know how to say her name. She's on Twitter all the time. She's in the press box. Tumani Carroll, she wrote this. She talks about how Safina grew up training with her brother, and she was kind of the opposite of her brother, right? Marat Safin, super talented, not so much of a hard worker. Think Nick Kyrgios. Safin was kind of Kyrgios-like, except he won some majors. And people would come to see the crazy spectacle and the raw talent. Dinara Safina, the opposite, maybe not as talented as her brother, but a very hard worker, until she got on the biggest stages, chances to win majors, and really looked like she kind of choked. She says, I always had a dream to be famous, number one, all this, but then suddenly I felt so much pressure being there at number one in the world. I didn't expect that I would have this pressure. I thought it was going to be fun, you know? You become famous, you're number one, everybody's happy. It's the opposite. Everybody wants to beat you. In the 2009 Australian Open, she froze and was eviscerated 6-0, 6-3 by Serena Williams. She collapsed under pressure in the final of Roland Garros against Svetlana Kuznetsova, infamously serving a double fault on match point. Again, even to me, I was, back in, what year was that again? 2009? Back then in 2009, even though I didn't, know a ton about tennis, I'd only been playing for about 4 or 5 years, even to me, it was pretty obvious that she choked in those matches. I think anyone could see it, no matter how much or how little you knew about tennis. By Wimbledon in 2009, I think these are all three in the same year, she was the number one player in the world. I remember this very well. Yet Serena held 3 Grand Slam titles that year. She became the butt of every joke. And again, even Serena said some stuff in the media along these lines. People are basically saying, like, you're not the real number one, Dinara Safina. How can you be? You've never even won a major. Which, proves to some of us out there, if you were ever wondering, do these tennis players read what people write about them in the news and hear what people say on TV and on the internets, the YouTubes? And I think the answer can be yes in many cases, and it can have a lot of damage to that player, and it obviously did. Of course, you hear every day the same questions in every interview. This is Safina talking about that. When are you going to win your first slam? And I'm like, you think I don't want to win a Grand Slam? And then I started to struggle with this because it's something that was really annoying for me, and it was very painful because it's something that I really wanted to win. And then she goes on to say something that's quite beautiful, but we're running out of time, is that she doesn't want to go back to playing. She wants to coach because she wants to help younger players not do what she did, not have all this stuff clouding your tennis judgment and basically causing you to choke, because there's no denying that she was very choky in big moments. And who can blame her? It takes a superhuman steel resolve to resist these kind of emotions, especially in such a large scale when you're in the media spotlight like that and everyone's questioning, oh, you're number one? How come you haven't won a major? Which leads me finally, and hit the music because we're getting out of here. We will be back next week. I'm not sure exactly what we'll do yet. I got a recommendation from one of our patron saints over at patreon.com/coffeebreaktennis. Helps fund this show and keep us going doing Coffee Break Tennis during the pandemic. Got a very interesting suggestion from, I won't say what it is, but it has to do with breaking down a famous match from Federer. I might do that next week. We shall see. But we'll definitely have a show next week. And let's get into this last thing. This ties it all together for me. Here's the difference. This makes me, when I read that, I think, geez, what about all those years where Federer didn't win a major from 2012 Wimbledon all the way to 2017 Australian Open? 5 years of winning no majors. How did Roger Federer not feel kind of like Dinara Safina and not let it get to his head? Maybe in some of those years he did a little bit. Maybe. Who knows? This will go a long way in answering that question. This is from tennisworldusa.org. Severin Luti says, what's fascinating, and again, this is one of those things where the articles, Federer is funnier than most people think. Yeah, that'll get some clicks. I know Federer's a funny guy. I don't really care. It's buried lower in the article that is actually something very interesting and profound to me after reading how Dinara Safina dealt emotionally with all the pressure of being number one in the world and having no major titles. Severin Luti, coach of Roger Federer, said, what's fascinating for me is that he is still doing this stuff at 38. He's asking himself those questions. You need to analyze and ask yourself the right questions, and you need to look forward. Step up for the next game, the next practice. I've learned a lot of things from him, from Roger Federer. The coach has learned from the student. Okay, it's not exactly that kind of relationship. The coach has learned from Roger Federer. Sometimes you win matches that you shouldn't. Sometimes you lose matches that you shouldn't. It's all about not getting too negative on yourself. You would soon get a second chance. Always remember out there, folks, you will soon get a second chance. So don't freak out about winning or losing. Don't freak out about succeeding or failing. You will always have a second chance. So go for it and swing freely like Roger Federer. Thanks for listening to the show today. Again, we will be back next week. Stay safe out there. Wear your mask. You can count on us to be there probably Friday of next week. See ya!